On May 11th, 1996, at 2:04 p.m, ValuJet Flight 592 departed Miami International Airport bound for Atlanta. At 2:10 p.m, the passengers began to smell smoke. At the same time, the pilots heard a loud bang in their headset and noticed the plane was losing electrical power. Moments later, a flight attendant entered the cockpit and informed the pilots of a fire in the passenger cabin. At 2:13 p.m, the captain began to turn the plane left in preparation for a return to Miami. The plane banked, rolled onto its side, then nosedived into the Florida Everglades at a speed of 507 miles per hour. All 110 people on board were killed. This is the story of ValuJet, how a hidden hazard ignited disaster, and how an airline's lax attitude to safety resulted in its own catastrophic downfall. Hello and welcome back to the iSafe YouTube channel, where today we're going to share some exciting news. The news that we finally have a name for this series, and it's got to be worthy of a post-edit drum roll. Anatomy of an accident. Oh, I tell you what, I can hear the public of YouTube just jackhammering the subscribe button to that. So, yeah, we're really excited about this series and even more excited about the name. But today we're going to be talking about ValuJet. I know absolutely nothing about ValuJet. So we're going to read about it, we're going to learn about it together, and we're going to find out what happens. ValuJet was founded in the 1990s as a low-cost carrier during a period of rapid expansion in the US aviation industry. The airline grew quickly and became the fastest airline to make a profit in the history of American aviation, earning $21 million in 1994 alone. This was largely due to good marketing. It had a smiling cartoon aeroplane as its logo named Critter, who starred in a memorable advert promoting low fares to Florida. To be honest, it sounds a bit shitty even for 1990s, but of course, these low fares were the biggest drivers of the airline's popularity and profitability, and to make these fares feasible, ValuJet adopted cost-cutting measures that were considered aggressive even by low-cost airline standard. For example, planes were purchased in a used condition from other airlines. It also required pilots to pay for their own training and only paid them after completing flights. It gave its flight attendants basic training and outsourced almost every function under the sun to third parties. It turned subcontractors' maintenance to several companies, who in turn subcontracted the work to other companies, all of whom received little or no training or supervision from the airline. And whenever there were delays caused by mechanics, ValuJet will cut the pay of the mechanics working on the plane. It's not a great idea. Like, here's where the rant about I don't want to get sued by. But one of the things that, and this has nothing to do with health and safety, it's nothing to do with anything, but the thing that annoys me most about Value Airlines is Value Airlines are great. Sometimes you just want to get where you want to go and it costs you like no money. But it's like the extra bits that you're spending money on that are also really substandard. And the example is 7 years ago, and I shouldn't be holding a grudge for this long, but I was on a stag do in Dublin, right? I was hanging. I was on my way back from this stag do. I was in a really bad way, and all I needed were a bacon sandwich. I got on this flight. I got on this, let's call them Ryan flight. I asked for a bacon sandwich. It took half an hour to come. I don't know why it took half an hour for this bacon sandwich. It's only an hour flight, so I hardly had any time to eat it. And when I received it, bear in mind, is all I needed was salt and protein, and then I felt all right. I had one rash of anemic bacon on a stale bun. It cost me €6, but I'd have happily paid double that just to have, like, a sandwich with 3 rashers of bacon that would have sorted me out. Like, just charge a bit more. Like, not everything has to be cost-cutting. But these guys, in particular, like, this is, like, ridiculous. So they're using subcontractors who are then subcontracting it to other people. So they've got no control over this. There's no training or supervision for these people. And these are all safety-critical maintenance tasks. So up to yet not impressed with ValuJet. Unsurprisingly, ValuJet soon developed a reputation for lackluster safety. Between 1994 and June 1996, ValuJet planes made 129 emergency landings, and their accident rate was more than 14 times that of legacy airlines. In 1995, the United States military refused the airline's bid to fly its personnel due to safety concerns, and in February 1996, the Federal Aviation Administration, or the FAA, Atlanta office sent a memo to its HQ in Washington, D.C. stating that they wanted ValuJet grounded. Bureaucracy prevented this from being actioned, and so ValuJet remained airborne right up until May 11, 1996. The aircraft, a DC-932, was 27 years old and had previously been flown by Delta Airlines. In the 2 years prior to the crash, it had been showing serious signs of age, to put it lightly. There had been 2 aborted takeoffs and 8 emergency landings, which were primarily caused by engines and pressurization errors. On the flip side, the flight's crew was highly experienced and capable. There was Captain Candy Kerbeck, who had accumulated 8,928 total flight hours throughout her career, including over 2,000 on the DC-9, and the first officer, Richard Hazen, who had more than 11,800 total flight hours, also with over 2,000 hours on the DC-9. Along with the cabin crew, they did everything they could to prevent the catastrophic fate of Flight 592, but nothing could have saved them or their 105 passengers from what was to come. Flight 592 left gate G2 in Miami, having been delayed for 1 hour and 4 minutes because of an electrical problem. At 2:04 p.m, the plane took off and began a normal climb headed for Atlanta. At 2:10 p.m. came a smell of smoke and a loud bang in the pilot's headset, along with a loss of electrical power. In the cabin, it was evident there was a fire. ValuJet's flight attendant training manual stated that the cockpit doors should have been opened when the smoke might be present in the cabin, but given that the intercom was down, the flight attendants had no choice but to enter the cockpit and alert the pilots. Kerbeck and Hazen immediately radioed air traffic control for a return to Miami and were given instructions to do so. Kerbeck began to turn the plane left. It was around this time, just 10 minutes after takeoff, that Flight 592 disappeared from radar. Multiple eyewitnesses watched as the plane banked sharply and rolled onto its side before entering a nosedive into the Everglades, a few miles west of Miami, where it struck the ground at a near vertical angle. According to those witnesses, the plane seemed to disappear after hitting the swamp, and nothing could be seen but scattered debris, parts of an engine, and a large pool of jet fuel near the crash site. All on board were killed instantly. Recovery of the aircraft and victims was nearly impossible due to the location and sheer velocity of the crash. The aircraft had been completely destroyed upon impact with the limestone floor of the swamp, and rescuers were plagued with sawgrass, alligators, and a risk of bacterial infection at every turn. After weeks of recovery, very few intact human remains were found. It's not very nice, is it? There's nothing really I can comment on at the minute, other than I'm just waiting for this, crap maintenance activity to come back into it. We just need to know what happened with the plane, but I guess we'll find that out next. The National Transportation Safety Board, NTSB, carried out a 15-month investigation and concluded that the fire originated in the cargo hold. The source was traced to chemical oxygen generators, devices that were used to supply oxygen to passengers during cabin pressurization. The presence of these particular oxygen generators on Flight 592 was in direct violation of FAA rules forbidding the transportation of hazardous materials in passenger aircraft cargo holds. The cargo compartment was a Class D design in which fire suppression is accomplished simply by sealing the hold from outside air. These compartments are not equipped with smoke detectors, as any fire in this environment would immediately extinguish due to a lack of oxygen. However, just before takeoff, 144 expired chemical oxygen generators had been placed in the cargo's compartment by ValuJet's maintenance contractor SaberTech. SaberTech personnel had failed to cover the generator's firing pins with the prescribed plastic caps and instead had simply cut the cords attached to the pins, or applied duct tape around the cans. Since these were expired canisters, the SaberTech personnel indicated on the cargo manifest that they were empty canisters and therefore safe and legal for transportation, which they categorically were not. Right, so these guys with total lack of training have put a hazardous container onto a plane. They've tried to justify it by saying they're expired so they're empty. This is a litany of just complete incompetence at the minute, isn't it? Investigators determined that one of the oxygen generators was likely triggered when the plane experienced a slight jolt while taxiing. The heat release from one canister would have caused the others to activate, creating more heat and more oxygen. Unstoppable chain reaction, which inevitably broke out into a fire. The fire was made worse by the various combustible items in the cargo hold, including 2 aircraft tyres. The bang that the pilots heard in their headset was attributed to the sudden cabin pressure change caused by one of the tyres in the cargo hold exploding from heat. The fire quickly spread, burning through the floorboards in the cabin and destroying the cables that ran to the back of the aircraft. Investigators concluded that the pilots had control of the aircraft until they performed the sharp left turn, by which time the fire had completely destroyed the aircraft's electronics. I just don't understand how they can put these 144 prohibited items on there. And a maintenance contractor's done this. They were clearly aware of this because they wrote on the manifest that they were safe to use. But this SaberTech never actually, from my understanding, never checked that they were empty and purged. Now, you've got an oxidizing agent on there, which, if you've got your fire triangle, heat, fuel, and oxygen to burn. An oxidizing agent literally supercharges that reaction. Basically, the more that reaction happens, the more oxygen, which means more fire. You've got your fuel there and you've got your heat there. And that's how inept these people were. I mean, it sounded bad in the more intro section of subbing out to subcontractors who were subbing it out. But I didn't expect that level of incompetence. I'm no aircraft safety officer. I know very little about aircraft safety. I know it's a way higher standard than what we normally have to do. That is horrendous. ValuJet shouldn't have been subbing to subbies who were subbing out, and there should have been more control over the purchasing process. There should have been more governance from the company. But for me, the guys from SaberTech should be in the dock for this. Big style. So, culpability and accountability is the next section. Let's find out what happened. The NTSB found no fault with the flight crew, rightly so. They all seemed competent, they seemed very experienced, and they seemed like they did the right thing at the right time. Responsibility was instead placed on 3 parties: SaberTech, rightly so, for improper packaging, labelling and storage of the hazardous oxygen generators; ValuJet for not supervising SaberTech, which is what I've just said, like there should have been a higher level of supervision and governance there; and the FAA for not monitoring smoke detection and fire suppression systems in the cargo hold, as was recommended to them in 1988 after a similar incident occurred on an American Airlines flight. Having been found guilty for mishandling hazardous material and improper training, SaberTech was fined $2 million and ordered to pay $9 million in restitution. 3 of their employees were directly charged. 2 of them were acquitted, while a 3rd man was indicted in absentia because he never showed up to court. A warrant was issued for his arrest and he remains a fugitive to this day, with a $10,000 reward offered by the FBI for information on his whereabouts. SaberTech, having been the first American aviation company to be criminally prosecuted, went out of business in 1990. ValuJet was grounded by the FAA on June 16, 1996. So they've got like a couple of months after that, didn't they? Like, so they've crashed. I would have expected the FAA to react quicker than that, really. If you're just smashing into the floor and 110 people are dead, I would have expected an immediate response. And in like a workplace accident, the HSE, particularly when there's a fatality, the HSE will just stop you working. They'll put what they call a prohibition notice on you, and they can keep that in place until they're happy that it's safe. So in our own workplaces, you know, that's an immediate thing. You know, whether you're at fault or not, the assumption is that we need to figure out what it is before you can resume working and make sure that nobody else is injured by this. So I would have thought the FAA would have done that, but apparently they're allowed to fly for a couple of months after. They were allowed to resume flying again a few months later, but they never recovered from the crash. In 1997, ValuJet acquired AirTran Airways and changed its name to AirTran in an attempt to shake its infamy of the ValuJet name. The company lived on and was purchased by Southwest Airlines in 2011. Many families of Flight 592 victims were outraged that ValuJet was never prosecuted. So they're never prosecuted at all for it. That's insane. Because, like, right, so again, bringing it back to like how it works in the UK and where there's accidents and stuff like that. If you own a business and you bring in a subcontractor, so let's say you're a manufacturing business and you bring somebody on to test those fire alarms, you have a duty of care to make sure that subcontractor is competent and does the job right, you know, within reasonable grounds. For me, and maybe there's more to it than the script's saying, they didn't do everything reasonable to ensure that. They subbed it out. There was clearly violations going on here. Like, Sabertech definitely are up there. They're the number one people who should be getting prosecuted. But I would have expected ValuJet to get something because they've not vetted the suppliers correctly, and that's caused a safety hazard, and they ultimately have the duty of care. So if I go and I buy a car, if let's say I buy a car from a well-known car retailer, and that car breaks, and it's because of a certain component that's made by a third-party company. Like, car companies buy in things from subcontractors, they don't make everything themselves. Now, I can't just go and sue that third-party company. I have to go and sue whoever manufactured that car. It's called the neighbourhood principle, because otherwise, like, it's up to them you have to follow that chain. So I bought the car from them, I have to sue them, and then they would have to sue whoever did that component to reclaim their losses. So I would have expected the US has a similar mechanism legally to do that, and therefore there'd have been certainly a lot of civil action brought against ValuJet, which would have put pressure on the criminal side of it to push for prosecutions on that. It's so weird that the subcontractor got the vast majority of it. It's right that they got the vast majority of it, but they should have got something, in my eyes. In 1998, the FAA finally agreed to a regulatory change that had been recommended to them by the NTSB a decade prior, revising standards requiring all Class D cargo holds to be converted to Class C or E. These types of hold are equipped with fire detection and fire suppression equipment. Had this been done back in 1988, it would have prevented the Flight 592 disaster. Yeah, I agree. And to be honest, how much effort is it to put some sort of fire detection system in there? You know, that speed and being able to get back to the runway, to make that turn to come back to the runway, you know, it would have given them a 10-minute heads up. ValuJet had a good thing going. They were a low cost, had good branding, and were growing rapidly as a result. But what they got so utterly wrong was safety. Reckless outsourcing of maintenance and aggressive cost cutting in the name of profit is ultimately what caused this disaster. You can't sustainably run any business this way, let alone an airline, where the cost of neglect is always going to be human life. If it hadn't have been Flight 592, it would have been another ValuJet plane that one way or another would have fell disastrously from the sky. Okay, so lots we can learn from this ValuJet. The main thing that I'm taking out of it is control of contractors, control of subcontractors. Now, at least in the UK, all businesses have a responsibility to ensure the health, safety and welfare of any contractor that comes onto their site. So what that essentially means is if they're on your site, you have to make sure that they are working safely, because if they have an accident, you can get pulled into that prosecution and you can be pulled into civil action and that kind of thing as well. So that starts before they even arrive. That starts at the point of inquiry. You should be vetting those people. You should be sending out requests for information, PQQs, gathering insurance documentation, gathering accident statistics, and building a picture of whether this is a safe contractor before they even step foot anywhere near your site. Once you've engaged those people, assuming they are safe, you should be making sure that you are assessing any safety documentation, so their competency records, their risk assessments, method statements. Again, if they're not up to snuff, find somebody whose documentation is up to snuff. And then when they get onto site, making sure that you're communicating with them, you're giving them the right training that's specific to your site through inductions, and then monitor them through their work activity to make sure they do what they say they're going to do. That's what is expected of you as a business owner or a business that's bringing on subcontractors. If ValuJet had done that with this company, with the maintenance company, Sabertech, then this wouldn't have happened. They would have highlighted that, oh, Sabertech have built a bomb on one of his planes, maybe we shouldn't use them, or maybe we should at least not fly this plane. If they put the supervision in, and that was alluded in the prosecution side of it, that was the main thing ValuJet was up for. On this occasion, they didn't get prosecuted. I don't know how they managed that. Amazing solicitors, I'd imagine. But in real life, and for most businesses, if that kind of thing happened with a subcontractor, you would be dragged into it. So my second one is putting profits in front of health and safety. There's so much that you should cut before your health and safety budget. I know I had the rant about the bacon sandwich. Come on, Ryan Flights. Improve your standard of bacon sandwich. I still stand by that. You know, I'm willing to pay for it, or at least have a premium bacon sandwich option that I can have when I'm hanging. You know, but as crap as that bacon sandwich is, and as much as it's not going to help my hangover, and that's not going to result in certain death, cut your budget in other places. Don't cut your maintenance. Don't cut your safety. Don't cut your standards. We see this in a lot of industries where safety is the last priority, particularly construction. They'll put in a tender that requires a full-time safety presence, and they'll go, we're a bit tight on budget here, we need to cut that. So, I'll tell you what, we'll just make sure safety blokes on 1 day a week instead of 5 days a week. That's not where you want to cut that budget. Because if you have an accident, you're never going to work with that client again. You're looking at fines, you're looking at civil action, you're looking at so much things that's going to cost you a lot more than even if you have to take a few blokes off the project from an operational point of view and you get delays from that. You're playing with fire, you're gambling with people's lives, and you're gambling with your own business. Never, ever cut the safety budget. If it gets to a point where you need to cut the safety budget, don't do the job, or, wrap it up as a business because it's not working. Don't cut that bit. Finally, is making sure that you're up to date with the regulations and your legislation here. So, like the FAA updated their guidelines and they adopted the thing about having fire extinguishers and fire alarms. The HSE and other regulators will update their legislation and their expectations of what you've got to achieve on a very regular basis. As a business, you should be monitoring that and making sure that you are up to date with the latest legislation. The best way of doing that is using a legal matrix and reviewing that legal matrix on a regular basis, making sure you signed up to regular updates, things like the HSE bulletin service, making sure that you're made aware when there is a change of regulation and taking action when that change in regulation affects you. We've mentioned in Radium Girls, I'm going to mention it again here, that safety legislation is built in blood. Safety legislation is there as a reaction to accidents that have happened previously. This with the class C, Class E, extinguisher systems and alarm systems within the aircraft is one of them, and it's probably a reason why it's safer to fly today than it were in the 1990s, and why we're not crapping ourselves every time we go on a plane to go to Mallorca or whatever. But you need to follow that legislation, you need to keep up to date with that, otherwise your business is going to be in trouble. So thank you very much for watching Anatomy of an Accident. Still loving that title. And I'll catch you on the next one.